Have you ever kept a journal? And did anyone ever read it without your permission?
You know that moment when a sentence lands in your chest like a stone and you feel the story of your whole family tilt, not loudly, not with drama, but with a quiet click that tells you something just locked into place and will not unlock again. Because that is what happened to me when I stood in the hallway and heard my sister whisper to our parents that I was exhausting to be around, and then heard them sigh with that relieved agreement people use when they think someone has finally said the thing they were too polite to say out loud. I did not storm in or stage a scene, because I am not the storm type. I am the calendar link type, the reminder at 9 in the morning type, the sure I can swing by and drop that off type. The person who put the family dentist on auto pay and set the travel alerts on dad's card and made sure mom's prescriptions hit the pharmacy on a schedule she never had to think about, and for years that made me feel useful and connected and maybe a little smug. Which is not pretty, but it is honest, and in the hallway I stood with my hand on the banister and counted my breath until my heartbeat slowed enough to let me listen without shaking. Mom said, in that voice she uses when she is performing reasonableness, that I take things personally, that I always want to talk about feelings and outcomes and plans, that I make simple problems complicated. And Dad gave a little laugh that is not unkind, but is tired in a way that always makes me want to fix whatever is making him tired. And then Megan said she was just protecting her peace, and that maybe the family could try doing things without me for a while to see if the energy felt lighter, and I do not think anyone meant it to be cruel. I think they meant it to be efficient, which sometimes looks the same when you are on the receiving end. I stood there thinking about the thousands of tiny things that live under the surface of a family like wires behind a wall, things no one praises because they are invisible until they are cut. The family phone plan that I started because it gave us a discount when Megan upgraded her phone early and could not cover the fee. The health coverage from my job that I extended to her when she aged out of our parents' plan and told me she would figure it out soon, and soon turned into a year. The college savings account I opened when I was barely out of school myself, because our parents kept saying they would start one when things felt less tight and New Year's kept rolling by without it. The contact list no one else maintains. The password vault only I know how to open. The folder where I keep Dad's tax documents and Mom's warranty information and Megan's scholarship letters. All the dull, unglamorous scaffolding that makes other people's lives look effortless. I wish I could say the whisper surprised me, but it felt more like a translation of a language I had been pretending not to understand, because when you are the one who absorbs the stress and fills the gaps, the people you love get used to the gaps being filled and start to confuse your effort with a personality they are allowed to critique, and without meaning to, they start treating the person who holds the safety net like the problem rather than the net. I went home without saying goodbye, wrote a note to myself that said I am not a service, and made a list that was not a revenge plan so much as a reality plan, a simple inventory of what I support, what I fund, what I authorize, and what I tolerate. And as my pen moved down the page, I felt something unhook in my chest, not anger exactly, more like clarity with sharp edges, because if I truly am exhausting to be around, then the loving thing is to remove the exhaustion and let everyone try life at the weight they say feels right. I thought about the day I added Megan to my coverage because she cried in my car after a minor accident and said she would be careful if I could just help her for a bit. About the day I opened the college account because our parents were arguing over a repair bill and I knew they would never get around to it. About the night I sat with Mom on the phone while she panicked over a billing error and I straightened it out while she cried and told me I was her rock, and I let those memories sit with a whisper like two hands on the same scale until I saw what was heavier. So I did what I do best, not a speech, not a confrontation, just a decision that would speak in receipts and notifications and the sudden quiet that happens when a person stops holding up a corner of the house, and I closed my laptop, took a long breath, and told myself that tomorrow I would start with the thing that would make the message impossible to misunderstand, because if they wanted lightness, I knew exactly where to begin. The morning after the hallway whisper, I made coffee I did not drink, opened my laptop, and gave myself the kind of clear instruction I usually save for work crises. Because if the message needed to be impossible to misunderstand, then it had to arrive in the language that always gets through in this family, which is not tears or speeches or long texts that can be screenshotted and mocked in a group chat, but the cold language of accounts and confirmations and the sudden way a service stops when the card on file is no longer there to prop it up. I started with the phone plan because it was the neatest thread to pull and, if I am honest, because I knew it would be felt immediately, so I logged into the carrier portal that only I access. Saw Megan's line listed under the bundle I have carried since the day she upgraded before she could afford it, and I moved her number out of the discounted family plan into a separate account tagged for transfer. Turned off the auto pay that has quietly eaten a slice of every month for years. Changed the account password to something she does not know, and scheduled the release so that at midnight her phone would keep working only if she stepped up and attached her own card, which she is perfectly capable of doing, but has somehow never done while I was available to do it for her. Then I opened my insurance dashboard, the one where I added Megan as an occasional driver the week after her little fender bender when she cried in my car and promised she would pay me back once she got on her feet. And I removed her from the policy with the kind of steady, almost boring patience that used to make me feel like a good sister, noted the prorated refund amount, confirmed that any future claims under her name would not route to me, and sent the notice to her email and to our parents' shared address so that no one could pretend this was a secret thunderbolt or an ambush sprung for fun, because I might be done being everyone's background support, but I am not going to be sloppy or cruel. Because health scares make me lose sleep even when I am angry, I handled the medical side with the same combination of firmness and responsibility, which meant canceling the telehealth subscription and dental discount plan that I have been renewing for years because Megan never got around to finding something better through work, setting the end dates to the end of the billing cycle, and including in the notice a plain paragraph that listed the marketplace hotline and the employer benefits office and the step-by-step order she could follow to secure coverage in her own name, a paragraph that I wrote without sarcasm even though the temptation was right there humming in my throat. When I hit submit on the last confirmation and the email receipts rolled in like little neutral verdicts, I sat back and let the room be quiet, then my phone lit up with the first ripple of consequence. A string of texts from Megan full of question marks and half-accusations sent from her number while it still belonged to my account, followed by a call from Dad who began with that weary chuckle he uses to keep a lid on things and told me I was overreacting. That we could talk like adults, that this was all a misunderstanding, and all the while I could hear Mom coaching in the background, telling him to ask me to turn it all back on while they sorted out. And I said in one long breath that there was nothing to sort because I had simply aligned reality with the story they preferred, the story where I am exhausting and unnecessary, and that I trusted them to handle the lightness they wanted. By late afternoon, Megan's number bounced to voicemail, and then to nothing, and a new message hit my Instagram from a throwaway account that looked suspiciously like her, telling me I had humiliated her and put her in danger because she needed her maps and her banking and her ride share, and how could I be so heartless? And I wrote back one sentence that took me several minutes to assemble because I wanted it to be a scalpel and not a hammer, saying that I did not cancel her life, I only declined to fund it, and that everything she needs is a phone call and a debit card away, and that I had already sent the instructions she could follow without my help. I will not pretend it did not hurt to hear my mother's voice shake when she left a long voicemail promising that they never meant to exclude me that way, and that Megan did not mean the word she used. And I will also not pretend it did not feel like a deep clean to hear myself refuse, because when the price of being included is to be treated like a service with no right to push back, then the refusal is not a tantrum, it is a correction. And it was the first time in a very long time that I did not immediately rush to make everyone else comfortable. That night I forwarded the receipts to a folder labeled Boundaries, set my phone to Do Not Disturb, and lay there thinking not about chaos or revenge, but about calibration, because taking back what I pay for is not vengeance in my book, it is math. And like any good equation, it reveals the missing terms with embarrassing speed, which is why the next move will not be about a bill or a password or a login at all, but about something older and bigger that I built while everyone assumed it was And when I touch that piece, the silence that follows will not be a pause, it will be the point. By the time the second round of missed calls rolled into that folder, I had labeled boundaries, and my sister's temporary accounts bloomed like weeds across my notifications. I knew the next step was not about nudging anyone or negotiating some warmer tone for the group chat, but about telling the truth with money in a way that left no room for spin. Which meant I had to open the one account that none of them ever imagined I would touch because they had become so comfortable calling it the Family College Fund that they forgot I had opened it myself on a lunch break years ago when our parents were still promising to start one soon. Back when Megan was still in high school and the big conversations in our house were all about possibility and how the timing just was not right yet, I set up an auto transfer into a plain savings account with my name on it and a quiet label that said, M's Education, and every month, without an announcement or a parade, I let a slice of my paycheck slide into it while our parents kept saying they would jump in when the next tax return came through or when the car was finally paid off, and then holidays came, and repairs happened, and years slid by the way years do, and somehow every time Megan or my parents talked about her future they used the phrase, our fund, as if intention had done the heavy lifting. I will admit it did something knotted and tender in me when I logged in and saw the balance I had built with all those small decisions that no one clapped for, because I remembered the nights I chose a cheaper flight home so the transfer would still hit, and the weekend shifts I took so the amount could inch up a little without me feeling it too hard, and the way Mom would sometimes, without thinking, thank Dad for being such a planner, and I would swallow the reminder and tell myself it was not worth correcting because the point was not credit. The point was opportunity for my sister, who at the time seemed to believe in me even if she did not fully understand what it took. But the hallway whisper had moved the ground under my feet, and when a person tells you you're exhausting while living on the cushion you sew under their life, you either keep sewing and call it love, or you stop and call it truth. So I moved the balance out of that familiar little bucket and into a new account with a name that is none of their business, and I downloaded the full statement history because I knew there would be an argument about ownership, and I wanted a record that did not care about anyone's tone. And then, because I am not trying to sabotage my sister's future, I wrote a clean document that laid out 3 realistic paths she could take if college was still the plan, including the financial aid office she never visited, the scholarships she qualifies for that do not care about family drama, and the simple reality that plenty of adults pay their own way and turn out fine. When the transfer cleared, I sent one email to my parents and to Megan, using the same plain language I use at work when I need people to understand a change, explaining that I had personally funded what they referred to as the family college account, that I had now reallocated those funds, that I would not be contributing further to Megan's education, and that while I wished her well, I would no longer be the offstage financier of a narrative where I am the villain and the wallet at once, and I pressed send knowing the explosion would start before they reached the second paragraph. Dad called first with that thin patience that always telegraphs a lecture, telling me this was punitive and short-sighted, and that family does not keep score, and I said, in one long breath, because I was done letting him interrupt, that not keeping score is a luxury for people who are not doing the work, that they had been very comfortable enjoying the benefits of my labor while labeling my boundaries as drama, and that I trusted them to find another way since they had been saying for years that they would, and he sputtered something about principle that would have landed harder if he had not also asked what the new account was called, as if a name would carry moral authority. Megan's message arrived next as a wall of panic braided with entitlement, accusing me of ruining her life and demanding I reverse the transfer because everyone knows it is the family fund. And I replied with a single paragraph that took all my composure to craft, explaining that there is no such thing as a family fund someone else fills alone, that adult plans do not hinge on a sister's willingness to be ignored and then used, and that while I would not stand in her way, I would also not quietly carry her anymore, which earned me a thread of insults that read like they were dictated by our mother in the background. I am not naive about fallout, and I know money has a way of dragging out the ugliest parts of people who can afford to be polite when the bills are paid, but there was a steadiness in me that did not wobble when Mom called crying. insisting that I had misheard the whisper and that Megan did not mean exhausting the way it sounded, because the point was not the word anymore. The point was the relief in their voices when someone else finally said it, and the way they tried to turn my labor into an optional service they could review and rate while continuing to depend on it without gratitude. By evening, the group chat went quiet in that strategic way people go quiet when they are regrouping and counting who they can still control, and I put my phone face down on the table and felt the floor under my life settle into a shape that made sense. Because the story had been rewritten in a language they respect, and the next move would not be an email or a transfer or a cancellation at all. It would be something much more unsettling for them than any financial adjustment, a choice I had avoided for years because it felt cruel, even though it is the only thing that might finally teach them what my presence has always been worth, and when I make it there will be nothing to argue with, only the kind of silence that cannot be spun. The day after I moved the last dollar out of what they kept calling our fund, I sat with my phone in my hand and realized that for years I had treated it like a firehouse radio, always on, always ready to dispatch myself to whatever minor blaze someone else had set or ignored. So I slid the switch to Do Not Disturb, deleted the group chat that had become a bulletin board for other people's panic dressed up as banter, recorded a calm voicemail that said I was unavailable and would not be returning family calls for an indefinite period, and then I did the most radical thing I have ever done, which was nothing, because my whole life had been built on the belief that doing nothing was a moral failure when someone needed me. And I was finally willing to test whether that belief had been planted in me because it served them. Silence is not an absence when a family has been built on a secret economy of favors and invisible labor. It is a message written in a language everyone understands, even if they pretend otherwise. And within a single day, the first consequences started to surface in predictable waves that I watched roll toward me without stepping into them. The pharmacy calling my number, because I had been the one who set up the auto refills for my mother. The dentist reminding me about my father's appointment, because I had built the reminder system and given them my email since he never checks his. The auto renewal on the homeowners association fee stalling, because the card on file was mine. The college advising office sending a notice about deadlines and forms because my sister once used my address on a scholarship application and never updated it, all of it landing where it had always landed and then hitting a wall that finally said the word no. I did not ghost them in the way people use that word to be cruel or to avoid responsibility. I sent one final email that was brief, factual, and impossible to misinterpret, telling each of them where the responsibilities had been reassigned, which contact information belonged to them, what passwords and reminders I would no longer manage, which accounts they needed to claim, and a single sentence that read like a resignation letter, saying that I was stepping down from the unpaid role I had performed for years and that I wished them the adulthood they insisted I was denying them by always stepping in, after which I stopped replying, not as punishment, but as a boundary that would not wobble when the next emergency appeared with sirens. My mother tried the sentimental route first, leaving me a voice note in which she said she could not sleep because she kept thinking of all the times I had been her rock and wondering how we had come to this strange place where her eldest sounded like a stranger. And I let the note sit unanswered because the place we had come to was not strange, it was honest, and the cost of honesty is that you cannot soften it with the same old performance without teaching everyone that nothing has changed. While my father sent a text in his practical tone asking for the login to the tax folder and the cable account as if I would simply hand over the keys like a receptionist cleaning out a desk, and I ignored him too. Because any man who can lecture me about independence can learn how to reset a password and call a customer service line during business hours like every other adult who pays his own bills. Megan came in hot, of course, with messages that swung between begging and belittling, telling me I was overreacting, that I was destroying her prospects, that I had always been dramatic and controlling, and that this new act of martyrdom would not change the fact that family is family. And I read her words with a kind of clinical curiosity I have never felt before because I could see the old hooks in every sentence and feel them slide past me without finding purchase, a small miracle that looked like self-respect rather than revenge, though I would be lying if I said the quiet satisfaction of watching her scramble did not taste like justice. Outside the immediate circle, the ripples kept spreading in ways that taught me exactly how much of the family machine I had been oiling. Distant aunts wondering why the family birthday calendar suddenly stopped sending reminders. The church committee chair asking why my parents had missed their volunteer slot, and why the reminder emails bounced back. The neighbor texting to ask if everything was all right because my mother seemed rattled when the lawn service did not show up after years of clockwork visits that, as it turns out, I had arranged and prepaid in seasonal blocks, and each time I received one of those pings I let the ping pass, because the point of silence is not to create chaos. It is to hand people their own lives and then refuse to carry them across the messy parts. The strangest part, and the part one did not predict, was the way my own life expanded into the time and headspace that used to be consumed by their needs. Because when the phone stopped buzzing, I noticed what it felt like to cook dinner without checking a family calendar while the sauce simmered, to sit with a book without the reflex to tap the screen and scan for the next crisis I would have to solve before bed, to take a long walk and feel the urgent hum in my chest wind down to a level I have not felt since I was a teenager, and in that quiet I realized I had been running a private triage unit for years without ever naming it. By the end of the week, the tone shifted from angry to desperate, the messages growing longer and more theatrical, my mother pointing out that people were asking questions, my father warning that I was making them look bad, Megan threatening to show everyone what I had done and then begging me not to make her do that. And I told myself that if they needed an audience to learn what I had been saying in private for years, then maybe an audience would finally do the teaching I could never accomplish alone, which is why, when a cousin sent a screenshot with a careful "Are you seeing this?" and I opened my social media pages for the first time since I went quiet, the sight that met me made something settle inside me with the slow certainty of a door closing. Because there they were, faces arranged and voices trembling in the polished way people perform sincerity for likes, telling the world a story about the cold daughter who abandoned them, and I knew that the next move would not be private at all. When I finally opened the app and saw their faces arranged for sympathy and their captions written like eulogies for a daughter who dared to sit down after carrying the piano for years, I felt that old reflex to defend myself twitch and then fade. Because I understood in a way I had not allowed before that a person who is committed to misunderstanding you will not be corrected by more words, so if I was going to speak at all it had to be in the same language I used when I closed the accounts and moved the money, which is the language of simple facts that do not ask permission to be true. They had posted videos and long paragraphs about my supposed coldness and the danger of modern kids who cut off their elders after a single disagreement, all while artfully omitting whose card had been on their services, whose name had been on their reminders, and whose paychecks had been sliced for years to prop up the system they called family. And the comments were doing that familiar thing comments do where strangers take turns diagnosing, advising, and declaring verdicts on people they will never meet, with a few cousins chiming in to ask if someone could DM me because they were sure I would listen to reason if a neutral party reached out, and I sat there watching all of it roll by like a parade I had already stepped out of. I decided I would answer once. Not because they deserved a rebuttal, but because there were people in that wider circle who had watched me hold this whole thing together and deserved to see one clean line drawn in daylight. So I drafted a single post and pinned it to the top, and it did not name names or flame anyone or quote the private things I could have used to win points. It simply stated that I had resigned from an unpaid role that had grown to the size of a second job. That what they were calling abandonment was a refusal to keep subsidizing adults who preferred narratives to ownership, and that I wished everyone well as they took their own keys back from my hands. After which I attached a link to a folder labeled receipts that held redacted statements and confirmation emails and a dated timeline of the tasks I had carried, so that anyone tempted by the performance of martyrdom could contrast it with the paper that never lies. Because I know how quickly people pivot to the money when the facts are inconvenient, I added a paragraph that said the account they had been publicly calling our college fund had been built by my transfers alone, that it no longer existed in that form, and that a portion of those funds had been redirected to seed a small scholarship administered by a third party for students who are supporting their families while trying to finish school, which meant that my investment in the idea of education would still help someone, just not someone who treated the person writing the checks like a nuisance to be managed, and I made sure the tone stayed dry and steady so it could not be spun as gloating. The response was immediate in the way public things always are, with some people angry that I had aired anything at all and others relieved to see a story that matched what they had observed in quieter ways over the years. A neighbor messaging to say she had always wondered how those bills got paid so smoothly, a cousin admitting that she had been called exhausting once too, and that the word sits on a woman the way a weight sits on a beam, and my parents trying to pivot into a new narrative about miscommunication while Megan, of course, swung between outrage and calculation, sending me a private message that accused me of humiliating her, and then a follow-up that suggested we could put out a joint statement if I would reverse the decisions I had made. I did not reply to any of them because the point of speaking once is that you do not keep arguing after you have said the thing you came to say. And because the most radical part of this whole change is not the money or the cancellations, but the discipline of not getting back on the stage when someone shakes the prop table, so I muted their accounts, turned off comments on my post, and sent a quiet note to the scholarship administrator confirming that the paperwork had been filed and that the first student would be chosen without any input from me, which felt like the opposite of revenge, a choice that refuses to become the thing it is responding to. Days passed, and the noise did what noise always does, spiking and then settling as people moved on to the next drama. But the part that stayed was not the performance or the arguments. It was the interior shift that made everything else possible. The knowledge that I had stopped auditioning for a role I never wanted and started living like a person whose worth is not measured by how much chaos she can absorb without complaint, and while my family may never admit it, the lesson landed where it needed to, because they are now, by necessity, learning phone trees and password resets and budgeting and schedules, which means the world did not end when I stepped away, it merely corrected itself. I will not pretend there is no sting when I think about the word my sister chose or the ease with which my parents agreed, and I will not pretend I do not sometimes rehearse comebacks I will never deliver, but when I picture the last move in this long game, it is not a final clapback or a grand apology or any kind of reunion staged for a camera. It is me keeping the boundary steady while life gets quieter and truer. It is the scholarship letter landing in the inbox of a kid who has been carrying too much and finally feels seen. It is my mother learning how to call the pharmacy and my father putting his own email on the accounts and my sister discovering that independence is not a punishment. It is adulthood, and it is me closing the app, finishing my coffee while it is still warm, and understanding that winning did not mean making them cry harder. It meant not needing their applause to keep breathing.